Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, a new era in the Middle East is born with the signing of the Abraham Accords. Stay tuned for what's in the deals between Israel, the UAE, and Bahrain. Meanwhile, Israeli schools get set to close earlier than expected as coronavirus infections continue to rise and health officials warn of dead in the streets. And finally, a picture of peace, Jewish and Muslim traditions coming together in a powerful way ahead of the Jewish high holidays. It's official. Israel on Tuesday finally signed two separate bilateral normalization agreements with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, the third and fourth Arab countries to sign such agreements with Israel following Egypt and Jordan. A picture worth several thousand words. A historic day in the White House lawn as the United States officially brokers two more normalization agreements between Israel and Arab states. United States President Donald Trump, foreign ministers from the UAE and Bahrain, Abdullah bin Zayed and Abdulatif al-Zayani, and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, all signing the momentous documents.
Today, the world sees that they're choosing cooperation over conflict, friendship over enmity, prosperity over poverty, and hope over despair. They are choosing a future in which Arabs and Israelis, Muslims, Jews, and Christians can live together, pray together, and dream together, side by side in harmony, community, and peace.
This day is a pivot of history. It heralds a new dawn of peace. For thousands of years, the Jewish people have prayed for peace. For decades, the Jewish state has prayed for peace. And this is why today we're filled with such profound gratitude.
I stand here today to extend a hand of peace and receive a hand of peace. In our faith, we say, "O God, you are peace, and from you comes peace." The search for peace is an innate principle, yet principles are effectively realized when they're transformed into action. Today, we are already witnessing a change in the heart of the Middle East, a change that will send hope around the world. Bahrain, on the other hand, has only signed a joint declaration for peace under the new Abraham Accords, while pushing for peace with the Palestinians as a tenet to those agreements. Israel and Bahrain will move on to more fleshed-out bilateral agreements in the coming weeks.
Today's agreement is an important first step, and it is now incumbent on us to work urgently and actively to bring about the lasting peace and security our peoples deserve. A just, comprehensive, and enduring two-state solution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict will be the foundation, the bedrock of such peace.
In any case, the big news is that the completed Abraham Accords, signed by United States President Donald Trump, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, and UAE Foreign Minister al-Zayed, has been released for publication. And aspiring to, quote, realize the vision of a Middle East that is stable, peaceful, and prosperous for all, it includes agreements on full normalization of bilateral ties, establishment of embassies and ambassadors, a vow to prevent terrorist or hostile activities while promoting peace in the Middle East, a framework for navigating disputes, and of course, mutual understandings in everything from finance and healthcare to education, environment, water, and tourism. Pro-Israel demonstrators outside the ceremony hailing the agreement for its unique benefits.
This is the first peace treaty since Egypt, really, and then Jordan. And plus, not only a peace treaty, it's going to be an economic benefit for everybody. I mean, that's the main thing, economically, tourism, trade.
Then finally, ending the ceremony, the White House hosted a lunch in which President Trump again signaled a very bright future, with at least half a dozen other nations predicted to soon follow in the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain's footsteps.
Yeah, we're very far down the road with about five additional countries. Frankly, I think we could have had them here today. We thought out of respect UAE, they deserved it. And Bahrain came immediately after. They really wanted to do it. But we'll have at least 5 or 6 countries coming along very quickly. It's going to be peace in the Middle East.
And now to expand on the terms, obligations, and concessions within the Abraham Accords, we're joined by Professor Hillel Frisch of Bar-Ilan University. Thank you so much for being with us, Professor. Now, let's start with the terms. What are the objectives that are reflected in the agreement between these two countries?
So basically, normalization, complete peace relations, and that's very, very important in light of the failure, basically, of the Egyptian and Jordanian peace agreements to fully flower into full-fledged warm peace agreements. And here, they've learned from those failures, and they really guarantee the possibility of creating a warm peace. And therefore, there is the possibility that these will be the first peace agreements that flower into a full peace rather than the Jordanian and the Egyptian, because the Egyptian and Jordanian agreements were basically flawed because Egypt almost inevitably looks at Israel as a geostrategic rival, and the Jordanians have a large Palestinian population. None of these obstructions hold for these states. There's no direct conflict between Israel and these states, and therefore that there is a possibility that it will bloom.
So what will it take to accomplish these goals of flowering into a full peace, as you say?
Basically, it's societal level relationships, football clubs, cooperation between universities, scientific communities. Of course, probably the most important is business relations and tourism, mutual tourism, probably more Israeli tourism to the Gulf states than the Gulf states to Israel. But that's what really makes the key difference, not officialdom, but on the societal level.
So what about two big, tenets of the deal that were, really big up until now, but then they seem to be missing from the agreement: the sale of F-35s to the UAE and the stalling of the of annexations in the West Bank?
Well, basically, the F-35 is not a problem. I mean, this is not the first time that the United States, which is a sovereign country and the most powerful country in the world, goes its own way. I mean, we remember in 1978 when Carter, against AIPAC opposition and Israeli opposition, sold tens of F-15s, which were the latest planes, fighter planes available. And then, of course, there was the AWACS of 1981, also sold to Saudi Arabia. So this is not going to be the first time and last time. We also have to remember that the American R&D, military R&D, is $55 billion. That means that there's loads of ways of maintaining Israel's qualitative aid advantage over Arab states.
All right, well, Professor, thank you so much for joining with us.
That's such a crucial issue. The more crucial issue, of course, for many Israelis, is the trade-off between seemingly this warm peace and extending sovereignty. But that issue did not come up with the Accords, and I would interpret it as tacit agreement by these states to allow some kind of extension of sovereignty, probably over the blocks, the two basic blocks, the Jerusalem bloc and the Gush Etzion, the Zion bloc, and possibly Ariel. It would indicate that the extension of sovereignty won't be as wide as many of Likud adherents would hope for, but there is a kind of tacit agreement to the extension of sovereignty nevertheless.
All right, Professor, thank you so much for expanding on this.
Okay.
Now, with respect to the Palestinians, President Trump says that just as other nations are moving on from, quote, blood in the sand, so too will the Palestinians eventually return to the negotiating table. But the Palestinians have so far had a very different response. As leaders sat down to sign the Abraham Accords in D.C., Palestinian militants began firing the first of at least 13 rockets into Israeli cities, Ashdod and Ashkelon. Israeli health authorities reporting well over a dozen patients being admitted to hospital, including 5 people hit by shrapnel, a man in his 20s injured by shards of glass, and several more individuals suffering from shock. And this as pockets of Palestinian and pro-Palestinian protests erupted outside the White House and across the Middle East, including in Bahrain, chanting normalization is treason.
Trying to do it for election issues, and they are trying to do it in terms of showing the world that they are making peace. Peace with whom? There is no conflict between the UAE and Israel. There is no war. There is no border. There is no planes. There is no attacks. There is nothing. Same thing with Bahrain.
Palestinian authorities, meanwhile, are threatening that the UAE and Bahrain will come to regret their decision.
غضب للشعب الفلسطيني ولأمتنا العربية والإسلامية يوم الذلة والمهانة لحكام البحرين والإمارات وهم يطبعون مع الاحتلال الصهيوني. نؤكد على أن هذا اليوم يوم 15 من أيلول سيبقى يوما أسودا في حياة أولئك الأمراء والحكام الذين طبعوا تطبيعا خيانيا مع الاحتلال وتخلوا عن قضيتهم ودعم فلسطين.
For us as a Palestinian, we consider it very deep stabbing in the back of the Palestinians. It is a free offer for the Israelis to continue their occupation for our land and to expansion their settlements and carry on in the process of annexation of many Palestinian land.
Israel, on the other hand, has responded to the rocket fire with at least 10 airstrikes targeting a series of Hamas terror group positions in the Gaza Strip. And 2 Palestinians were later arrested attempting to infiltrate into Israel. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu accusing the Palestinians of failing to work towards peace while warning of a hefty price tag for these attacks.
אני לא מתפלא שהטרוריסטים הפלסטינים ירו לעבר ישראל בדיוק בזמן הטקס ההיסטורי הזה. הם רוצים להחזיר את השלום לאחור, הם לא יצליחו בזה. אנחנו נכה בכל אלה שידם שלוחה לפגוע בנו, ואנחנו נושיט יד לשלום בכל אלה שידם שלוחה לשלום איתנו.
In other news, just days ahead of the coming 3-week coronavirus closures, health authorities are warning of dead in the streets unless Israelis can get with the program. Nittany Manson reports.
Harsh nationwide lockdowns are set to begin this Friday in Israel, coinciding with the coming Jewish New Year celebrations. The Israeli Health Ministry releasing an ad campaign on how to celebrate without breaking coronavirus restrictions.
השנה נחגוג אחרת, פשוט כי אכפת לנו. נחגוג בחיק המשפחה הגרעינית בלבד.
נתפלל, בלי להתקהל.
נתרחק מהבית עד 500 מטר ונקפיד לעטות מסכות.
But Deputy Health Minister Yoav Kish is dishing out much more dire language, saying that if people don't abide by the regulations, then we'll see dead in the streets, quote, just like New York and in Italy. And indeed, trends are quickly going from bad to worse. Government authorities deciding to shut down schools across the country a day early, amidst another new daily record of coronavirus diagnoses reported overnight. The health ministry counting over 5,500 new infections in the past 24 hours, with 535 in serious condition, 138 on ventilators, and the death toll now hitting 1,147. Deputy Health Minister Kish adding that hospitals are already struggling or refusing to accept new coronavirus patients. All that said, the health committees say that this next outline will be more focused on mental health and allowing for certain exceptions than the first lockdown did. Coronavirus Committee member and Minister of Science and Technology, Yizchar Shai, explaining in an online summit that Israel is putting together provisions for personal sport, including allowing people to run along the seashore, take their kids to nearby parks, and more.
Now, opposite the government, one of the biggest opponents to Israel's closures and many other restrictions has been Professor Yoram Lass, former Director General of the Israeli Health Ministry. And Professor Lass joins us now to discuss the latest incoming lockdowns. So, Professor, first of all, thank you so much for being with us. Now, Israel goes into quarantine for 3 weeks this weekend, and many citizens are rightly asking if it will be effective. What's your take?
Unfortunately, I cannot see any benefit from this second lockdown. I can only see economic destruction. And all we have to do is to look on the first lockdown, which you remember we had in April. And then for another 2 or 3 months, we had no lockdown. Now let's look at the numbers. There is in Israel, I emphasize, in Israel, no excess mortality.
Well, but we have 10% infection rate, and hospitals are warning that they're going to be overcrowded. Some hospitals are already turning patients away from their coronavirus wards. So how does that?
I have news for you. During the regular influenza outbreak, every winter, 10%, which is 1 million Israelis, are infected. And you never knew about it. You never made any tests. You never count bodies. You never count patients. You are bored by influenza, which is comparable, absolutely comparable to coronavirus.
So how do you explain the fact that health authorities from all over the world are refuting what you're saying right now, that it's not the flu, that it is much more serious, and that we should be taking it more seriously in our health wards?
Listen to this. Pandemic psychosis. This is what we have thanks to another virus. The other virus are the social networks, which we never had before.
Professor, what are you proposing? What are you proposing to eradicate the plague or to address the coronavirus pandemic?
There is no plague. There is a disease. Very different words.
So how do you plan to address this disease? Because does it not bear an address?
Like we should have done during any regular winter, which means we have to invest in hospitals. We have to enlarge hospitals, staff, beds, equipment. We must protect the nursing houses. This is where most of the mortality comes from. And every individual who is afraid, and they should be afraid, listening to you and the media and the social networks, anybody who is afraid should use the mask, hygiene, social distancing, etc. But leave the other people, leave them to live their regular, normal life.
All right. Professor, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
On another note, we all know that the coronavirus has impacted nearly all industries across the country, including, but not limited to, commercial real estate. But we brought Eyal Katz, our real estate specialist, to speak more on the topic of office rentals and how they've been impacted by the plague. Eyal, thank you so much for being with us today.
Hi, Shana Tova.
Shana Tova. So, all right, we want to know about the commercial real estate industry and how that has suffered under this pandemic, considering a huge portion of workers are actually now working from home.
Yeah. Well, the commercial industry was the most affected industry. Regarding to the retail, that is still stable. If we look at shops and restaurants, when there's a lockdown, they're the first to be closed and they're the last to be opened. If we look at offices, companies now understand that they can settle for less meters. And they don't, if they have like a 500-meter office, they understand that they can settle for 200 meters office. And still, most of companies didn't go back to their offices. They're working from home.
So how about like other industries, workspace industries, for example? How have they been?
Workspace, open spaces, we can see in the last few years, a lot of new companies, a lot of new brands trying to copy WeWork and opening open spaces, and now they're like empty.
So why are they empty then?
The main reason is because of the contract. If I have a regular office, I sign a contract for, let's say, 3 years to 5 years, so I'm obligated for 5 years. In the open spaces, the contract, you can give a 30 days notice, and you can
drop it.
And you can drop the contract. So when the pandemic started, all the offices that had open space gave a 30-day notice, and they're not obligated. So like in a couple of months, they were empty.
Wow. All right. So, does this situation actually even maybe provide an opportunity for some companies?
Or for investors,
sure.
Maybe. But I still don't know, because everybody you speak to, you have different opinions, and we don't know where this market is heading yet. I think it's going to be interesting to look into it in a few months, half a year, and to see if companies are coming back in full capacity or not, and where this market is gonna head.
Oh, another interesting thing to note is the United Arab Emirates deal, the Abraham Accords that were just signed.
Yeah.
How might that actually impact the market?
Oh, that's going to be really interesting. I didn't see the contract. I don't know what's written in it, and I don't know if we can buy.
It's full bilateral ties.
Yeah. I don't know if we can buy properties in the UAE, and if we are allowed to buy properties, do we need to open a bank account? Do we need a visa? What's going to be the regulations? If they're going to buy properties in Israel, are we going to let them buy properties? And if we do, are they going to buy where the holy places are or close to the sea?
There's a lot of details to work out there.
It's going to be also interesting to look it up, yeah.
Eyal, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, and now, briefly, we move back to the new peace emerging in the Middle East as the Rosh Hashanah holidays approach this weekend. And few things represent these two events together better than the following images. First, a prayer service breaking out on the White House lawn during the Abraham Accords ceremony. Jews from all over the world standing 2 meters distance apart as the service was conducted. And second, a photo from earlier this month just released showing White House advisor Jared Kushner presenting the King of Bahrain with a very special Torah scroll, or one of the 5 books of Moses from the Jewish Old Testament. The scroll was reportedly written in the king's honor and will be used in a synagogue in Bahrain. And apparently, also, Kushner paid for the gorgeous gift out of his own pocket. And with that, let's now turn to the weather forecast. Weather tonight should be mostly clear again, with lows hovering around an average of 75 degrees Fahrenheit or 24 Celsius. Then tomorrow, you can expect temperatures to be roughly the same again, with highs of about 95 Fahrenheit or 35 Celsius. And now let's take a look at what's going viral in Israel. Wow. I'm amazed always at how animals just manage to get through the smallest spaces sometimes. Seems like a fun game for the cat. You can do it. Oh, I'm rooting for him now. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.43 shekels to the American dollar and 2.6 shekels to the Canadian dollar. For more news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube and Roku TV pages. I'm Aaron Porras. Thank you so much for watching.